The Willard Hotel's elegant facade hides centuries of secrets, its walls bearing witness to moments of American history that are too dangerous to record. Beneath its grand chandeliers, presidents have plotted wars, negotiated life-altering treaties, and whispered of clandestine plans in rooms with no official record. In room 228, Abraham Lincoln penned the address that would unite a fractured nation. In these rooms, the voice of Martin Luther King Jr. echoed with a speech that would change the world, while the FBI listened through the walls. But for all the historical significance, the Willards' true story remains a shadow, known only to those with access to its hidden spaces and locked doors. What was really decided behind these walls, and who were the true architects of America's fate? The Willards' silent beginning. The Willard was born out of ambition, not just to house the powerful, but to shape their decisions in total privacy. Washington in 1814 was a city of mud and aspiration. The capital had been burned by British forces just months before. The presidential mansion stood charred and hollow. Congress met in temporary quarters. Yet even in this moment of national humiliation, entrepreneurs saw opportunity. Henry Willard understood something fundamental about power. It needs a place to rest, a place to think, a place to conspire. He arrived in Washington with modest capital and immodest dreams. The building he would eventually claim stood at the corner of 14th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue, a strategic crossroads between the White House and Capitol Hill. Location was everything. In 1818, the original structure opened as Tennyson's Hotel. It was unremarkable. 4 stories of brick, narrow hallways, small windows. But Henry Willard saw past the present. He saw senators climbing those stairs, ambassadors dining in those rooms, presidents seeking refuge in those walls. By 1850, Willard had transformed the property beyond recognition. He added wings, expanded the dining hall, installed gas lights when most of Washington burned candles. The renovation cost $40,000, a staggering sum when a skilled carpenter earned $3 per week. Willard mortgaged everything: his home, his reputation, his future. The hotel became a cathedral of American ambition. Marble columns rose in the lobby. Crystal chandeliers caught the gaslight and scattered it across polished floors. The main dining room seated 200 guests beneath painted ceilings that depicted classical scenes of democracy and power. Every detail whispered the same message: important things happen here. And they did. The Willards' guest registry from 1850 to 1860 reads like a directory of American power. Daniel Webster stayed for months at a time. Henry Clay negotiated compromises in the second-floor suites. Foreign ministers arrived with trunks and translators. The hotel became the unofficial extension of government, the place where official Washington ended and real Washington began. Henry Willard charged premium rates, $5 per night when most hotels asked $2. But his guests paid willingly. They understood the value of proximity. A conversation in the Willard lobby reached more ears than a speech on the Senate floor. A handshake in the dining room carried more weight than a committee meeting. Power consolidated around those who could afford to stay. The building itself seemed to encourage secrecy. Thick walls muffled conversation. Private parlors allowed discreet meetings. Back staircases permitted unseen arrivals and departures. The architecture of the Willard was the architecture of influence. By 1860, as the nation fractured towards civil war, the Willard stood at the center of everything. It had become more than a hotel. It was the engine room of American politics, the place where deals were struck and destinies decided. the place where the powerful came not just to sleep, but to plot, scheme, and reshape the nation according to their will. Henry Willard had built his palace, but he could not control what happened within its walls. The question that haunted the empty hallways late at night remained unanswered. Could such a building, designed for luxury, also carry the weight of America's most secretive political moments? The answer would arrive with a president who understood the value of privacy above all else. Rooms for power brokers. The Willards' rooms weren't just for sleeping. They were the meeting places where treaties were drafted and wars discussed. February 4th, 1861. Abraham Lincoln stood in room 228, staring out at Pennsylvania Avenue. He had arrived in Washington the night before, traveling in secret, hunted by assassins, protected by bodyguards who kept him hidden beneath a shawl. The man elected to save the Union had entered his capital like a fugitive. The room was modest by Willard standards. A 4-poster bed, a writing desk, a fireplace that burned coal through the winter nights. But from this room, Lincoln could see the unfinished Capitol dome, a symbol of the broken nation he was meant to repair. He stayed at the Willard for 10 days before his inauguration, 10 days that shaped history. During those days, room 228 became the true seat of government. Senators climbed the stairs to plead for compromise. Border state delegations arrived to threaten secession. Office seekers crowded the hallway, hoping for appointments. Lincoln received them all. He listened. He calculated. He made promises he could not keep and refused demands he could not grant. The hotel staff watched everything. They saw the letters that arrived at midnight. They heard the arguments that echoed through walls. They cleaned the ashtrays filled with cigars smoked during all-night strategy sessions. The Willard servants became accidental witnesses to the making of a presidency. Lincoln wrote constantly. His handwriting filled page after page, drafting speeches, revising arguments, searching for the words that might prevent war. He understood that language was power. The right phrase could unite. The wrong word could destroy. In room 228, hunched over the writing desk, Lincoln crafted the rhetoric that would define his presidency. But he was not alone in using the Willard this way. Across the hall, William Seward, Lincoln's Secretary of State, conducted his own shadow government. Seward believed he would be the real power in the administration. He met with foreign diplomats, promised concessions, made assurances that contradicted Lincoln's positions. The Willard became a house of competing strategies, rival visions of how to save the nation playing out in adjacent rooms. The hotel's dining room became an extension of these power struggles. Every meal was a negotiation. Senators sat with cabinet members. Generals dined with industrialists. Conversations that began over oysters and champagne-shaped military appointments and war contracts. The Willards' chef employed 23 assistants. They served an average of 800 meals per day during the war years. Each meal was an opportunity for influence. The term lobbyist was born at the Willard. Ulysses Grant, when he became president, would spend evenings in the lobby smoking cigars. Those seeking favors learned to position themselves nearby, casual conversations leading to government contracts worth millions. The lobby became the marketplace of influence. The price was never stated outright, but everyone understood the transaction. By 1865, the Willard had hosted every significant figure in the Union government. Generals planned campaigns in private suites. Congressmen drafted legislation over brandy. Diplomats negotiated recognition in rooms where the drapes stayed drawn. The hotel had become indispensable. It was the location where official Washington met unofficial power, where public democracy gave way to private decision-making. What happens when rooms meant for rest are filled with power, secrets, and ambition? The Willard provided the answer. They become something else entirely. They become the real government. The shadow system that operates alongside official channels. The place where history is made before it is announced. And the cost of that transformation was already becoming clear. The dream that demanded everything with the Willards' rise came an unspoken bargain, a price paid in the currency of ambition, secrecy, and power. The Willards' success during the Civil War made Henry Willard wealthy, but wealth came with expectations. The hotel could not simply be a business. It had to be a stage, a theater for American power. And that required constant reinvention. In 1868, Willard began the most ambitious expansion yet. He purchased adjacent properties, demolished entire blocks, hired architects from Philadelphia who specialized in grand hotels. The new Willard would be 12 stories. It would contain over 300 rooms. It would cost $2 million, a sum that exceeded the annual budget of most state governments. The financing required delicate negotiations. Banks wanted assurance. Willard provided it by securing commitments from the federal government. Departments agreed to house visiting dignitaries at the Willard. The State Department guaranteed rooms for foreign delegations. The hotel became semi-official, a private business performing public functions. This arrangement created uncomfortable dependencies. Willard needed government patronage. The government needed the Willards' discretion. Neither could afford to break the relationship. The hotel had become too important, too embedded, too necessary to the functioning of Washington power. Ulysses Grant understood this better than anyone. As president from 1869 to 1877, Grant spent more time at the Willard than in the ideal White House. He preferred the hotel's informal atmosphere, the lobbies where he could smoke cigars and read newspapers, the restaurants where he could dine without ceremony, the private rooms where he could meet supporters without generating official records. But Grant's presence attracted others. Favor seekers learned his habits. They positioned themselves in the lobby every evening around 7, when Grant typically arrived for dinner. They bought him drinks, offered him cigars, engaged him in seemingly casual conversation that always turned toward requests, contracts for their businesses, appointments for their associates, land grants for their investors. Grant, generous and trusting, often agreed. He saw these interactions as the natural workings of democracy, citizens petitioning their president. But others saw something darker, a system of patronage and corruption operating openly. The Willards' lobby became notorious. Newspaper editorials condemned the lobbyists. Political cartoons depicted the hotel as a den of thieves. Reform movements demanded change, yet nothing changed. The system was too profitable, too convenient, too deeply woven into the fabric of Washington life. The Willards' account books from this era reveal the scale. Room rentals generated $200,000 per year. Restaurant and bar sales added another $100,000. But the real money came from services not listed in any ledger. The introductions arranged, the messages delivered, the meetings facilitated. The Willard charged nothing for these services. But guests understood. Generosity was expected. Tips to bellhops reached extraordinary amounts. A porter might receive $50 for delivering a letter to the right senator at the right moment. The hotel's staff became wealthy intermediaries in a system built on informal exchange. By 1880, the Willard employed 340 workers, maids and bellhops, cooks and waiters, desk clerks and doormen. Each one was a potential conduit of information. Each one watched and listened and remembered. The hotel's power derived partly from its luxury, but mostly from its knowledge. The Willard knew everything: who visited whom, what time they arrived, how long they stayed, which letters were delivered, which telegrams sent. This knowledge was power, and power demanded loyalty. The hotel's managers enforced strict codes of silence. Staff members who gossiped were dismissed immediately. Those who proved discreet were rewarded with bonuses and promotions. The Willard cultivated omerta, a culture of silence that protected the secrets of the powerful. But maintaining this system required constant vigilance, constant investment, constant compromise. The hotel that had begun as Henry Willard's dream had become something larger and more demanding. It required everything: his attention, his reputation, his integrity. The unspoken bargain was complete. The Willard status was built not on luxury alone, but on its power to manipulate outcomes. And that power would only grow as the nation entered a new century of conflicts, both foreign and domestic. The echoes of Lincoln's words. In a quiet room, Lincoln wrote the words that would bind a nation together, yet his thoughts were shrouded in secrecy. March 4th, 1865. Rain fell on Washington. The war was ending. Everyone knew it. Confederate armies were collapsing. Richmond would fall within weeks. But the peace that followed would be harder to win than the war. Lincoln returned to room 228 in the days before his second inauguration. He had spent little time at the Willard during his presidency, preferring the White House despite its cold drafts and constant interruptions. But for this speech, he needed privacy. He needed silence. He needed the protection of walls that had sheltered his thoughts before. The second inaugural address was short, 703 words. But those words had to accomplish everything. They had to explain 4 years of slaughter. They had to prepare the nation for reconstruction. They had to offer both justice and mercy. Lincoln knew the address would define his legacy. He wrote and rewrote, crossing out phrases, testing rhythms, searching for the perfect balance. The hotel staff remembered his habits. He wrote in the mornings between 6 and 9. He read drafts aloud to himself, testing how the words sounded. He paced the room, hands clasped behind his back, lips moving silently as he revised sentences in his mind. Sometimes he stopped at the window, staring out at the city, lost in thought for 20 minutes or more. What was he thinking in those moments? The question haunted those who watched. Lincoln's face revealed nothing. His eyes were distant, his expression unreadable. The toll of the war had changed him. He had aged a decade in 4 years. His skin was gray, his movement slow. Those who had known him before the war barely recognized the man, who emerged from room 228. The secrecy surrounding the address was deliberate. Lincoln showed drafts to almost no one. His cabinet members were excluded. Even his wife Mary was kept ignorant of the speech's contents. Lincoln understood that every word would be analyzed, every phrase interpreted. He could not afford leaks, could not risk premature reactions. The address had to arrive complete, unfiltered, delivered with the full authority of his office. On the night of March 3rd, Lincoln completed the final draft. He sat at the desk in room 228, writing by lamplight, the rain still falling outside. The speech began with an acknowledgement of how much the war had cost. It moved to a theological explanation of the conflict as divine punishment for slavery. It concluded with the famous passage, "With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right." These words emerged from solitude, from the privacy of a hotel room where no one could interrupt or influence. The Willard had provided Lincoln with something the White House could not: the space to think, the freedom to write without observation, the protection necessary for the creation of language that would endure. But the hotel's role in this moment was more complex than simple shelter. The Willard was complicit in the secrecy. The staff ensured Lincoln's isolation. They turned away visitors. They delivered meals without conversation. They cleaned the room only when Lincoln left. The hotel became a co-conspirator in the creation of history. And this raised uncomfortable questions. What else was hidden in these rooms? What other decisions were made in private, shielded from public scrutiny? The Willard's walls protected Lincoln's thoughts, but they also concealed them. The same architecture that enabled great speeches also enabled great secrets. Lincoln's second inaugural address was delivered on March 4th, 1865. The rain had stopped. Crowds filled Pennsylvania Avenue. Lincoln spoke for 6 minutes. The audience listened in near silence. When he finished, there was scattered applause. Many did not understand what they had heard. The speech was too complex, too theological, too ambiguous in its vision of reconciliation. But history recognized the address as one of Lincoln's masterpieces. The words that emerged from room 228 would be studied for generations. They would define the moral framework of Reconstruction. They would shape how Americans understood their nation's greatest trauma. Yet the cost of this achievement remained unexamined. Lincoln spent those final days before his second inauguration isolated, working alone, trusting no one with his thoughts. The presidency had demanded everything from him: his health, his happiness, his connection to others. Room 228 became a symbol of that isolation, a place where great words were born from great loneliness. 41 days later, Lincoln was dead, assassinated at Ford's Theater. He never returned to the Willard, but the room remained: the desk where he wrote, the window where he stood. The hotel preserved them as relics. Tourists came to see where history happened. They stared at the furniture. They imagined Lincoln writing. They felt the weight of significance. But they could not see what the room had cost: the human toll of secrecy, the isolation required for greatness, the price paid in the currency of solitude and silence. The Willard kept those secrets, as it always had, as it always would. The power brokers who made the Willard. The Willard became the backdrop for the rise of political figures whose influence wasn't seen but was felt across the world. The decades following the Civil War transformed the Willard into something unprecedented in American political life: a permanent institution of informal power, a place where elected office mattered less than access, and access was bought with cash, influence, and carefully cultivated relationships. Samuel Ward invented the modern lobbyist in the Willard's dining rooms. He arrived in Washington in 1868 with no official position and unlimited ambition. Ward was charming, educated, connected to wealthy families in New York. He understood that power in Washington did not flow through official channels. It flowed through personal relationships, through favors granted and debts accumulated, through dinners and cigars and late-night conversations. Ward became famous for his meals. He hosted dinners at the Willard that cost $500, an astonishing sum when congressmen earned $5,000 per year. These dinners were performances, 8 courses, French wines, terrapin soup, and canvasback duck. Ward invited carefully selected groups, a senator, an industrialist, a journalist, a general. He seated them strategically. He guided conversation. He created opportunities for connection. Nothing was asked directly. That was vulgar. Instead, Ward facilitated. He made introductions. He mentioned opportunities. He suggested possibilities. Later, after the dinner ended and the guests departed, the real work began. The senator would remember the industrialist's proposal. The journalist would write favorably about the general's campaign. The connections made over Ward's terrapin soup would generate contracts worth millions. The Willard's management understood the value of hosting such events. They provided Ward with private dining rooms. They assigned their best staff to serve his guests. They ensured absolute discretion. What happened at Ward's dinners stayed private. The hotel's reputation depended on this silence. By 1875, dozens of men like Ward operated from the Willard. They represented railroads, mining companies, land speculators, foreign governments. They lived in the hotel for months at a time, cultivating relationships, trading favors, accumulating influence. The hotel's resident population created a shadow government. These men had no official authority, but they shaped legislation. They influenced appointments. They directed the flow of federal resources toward their clients. The financial scale of this influence was staggering. Railroad companies spent $2 million per year on lobbying in the 1870s. Mining interests added another $1 million. Foreign governments seeking recognition or favorable treaties contributed hundreds of thousands more. Much of this money flowed through the Willard. Meals, rooms, services. The hotel became the central clearinghouse for American corruption. But to call it corruption was to misunderstand how Washington worked. These transactions were legal. Congressmen were not bribed. They were persuaded. They were informed. They were made to understand how their votes would benefit their constituents. The lobbyists at the Willard were not criminals. They were intermediaries. They connected private interests with public power, and they were extraordinarily effective. Between 1870 and 1890, Congress granted over 130 million acres of public land to railroad companies. Much of this legislation was drafted in the Willard's private rooms. The Pacific Railway Act, the timber grants, the mineral rights. Lobbyists wrote the bills. Congressmen introduced them. The legislation passed with minimal debate. The human cost of this system was harder to quantify. Small farmers displaced by railroad land grants. Native communities removed from territories given to mining companies. Public resources transferred to private hands at fractions of their value. These costs appeared nowhere in the Willard's elegant dining rooms. They were abstract, distant, someone else's problem. The hotel became a physical manifestation of the Gilded Age, gleaming surfaces covering structural rot, beauty masking exploitation. The same marble columns that awed visitors also sheltered the machinery of dispossession. The Willard was both symbol and instrument of an era when wealth concentrated into fewer hands and power operated without accountability. Julia Ward Howe, the abolitionist and women's rights advocate, stayed at the Willard in 1882. She found it repulsive, the ostentation, the waste, the casual way powerful men discussed the destruction of communities as if deciding which wine to order. She wrote in her diary that the Willard represented everything wrong with America. a place where money bought access and access bought power, and power enriched those who already had too much. But her criticisms changed nothing. The system was too entrenched, too profitable, too convenient for those who benefited. Reform movements came and went. Politicians promised to clean up Washington. Nothing changed. The lobbyists remained at the Willard. The dinners continued. The deals kept flowing. By 1890, the hotel employed 460 staff members. It generated revenues exceeding $350,000 per year. It had expanded again, adding 2 additional wings and another 100 rooms. The Willard was not just surviving, it was thriving, growing, becoming more essential to Washington's operation with each passing year. Did the Willard fuel the decay of Washington, D.C.'s political integrity? The question assumed integrity had existed before. But perhaps Washington had always operated this way. Perhaps the Willard had simply made visible what had always been present: the transactions, the favors, the networks of influence that determined outcomes far from the public's view. The hotel did not create this system, but it perfected it. It provided the infrastructure, the privacy, the discretion. The Willard became the institution where American democracy's highest ideals collided with its grubby reality. And in that collision, the reality always won. The FBI listens through the walls. While Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, the Willard's walls echoed with the sounds of surveillance. August 27, 1963. Martin Luther King Jr. checked into the Willard Hotel. He was in Washington to lead the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Over 200,000 people would gather the next day at the Lincoln Memorial. King would deliver the most important speech of his life. But first, he needed to finish writing it. The Willard gave King a suite on the 8th floor, 2 rooms, a sitting area, a view of Pennsylvania Avenue. The hotel had hosted presidents and generals and foreign dignitaries. Now it hosted the most prominent civil rights leader in America. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. King staying at the Willard represented progress, integration, the breaking down of barriers that had existed for generations. But 3 floors above King's suite, FBI agents had installed listening devices. The surveillance was authorized by J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director who viewed the civil rights movement as a communist threat. Hoover had convinced Attorney General Robert Kennedy to approve wiretaps on King. The authorization claimed national security concerns. The reality was political persecution. Hoover wanted information he could use to destroy King's reputation. The technical setup was sophisticated for 1963. Microphones were hidden in light fixtures and air vents. Wires ran through the walls to a monitoring station in another room. FBI agents sat with headphones and recording equipment, documenting every conversation, every telephone call, every private moment. King spent the evening of August 27th working on his speech. He was joined by advisors: Clarence Jones, Wyatt T. Walker, Andrew Young. They gathered in King's suite. They reviewed drafts. They debated phrasing. They argued about strategy. The speech needed to be perfect. It needed to speak to both black and white audiences. It needed to be radical enough to inspire and moderate enough to persuade. The FBI agents heard everything. They recorded King's frustrations, his doubts, his private conversations about tactics and messaging. The tapes captured intimate moments, jokes, casual remarks, the unguarded comments people make when they believe they are among friends. King did not know about the surveillance. The Willard's management did not know. The wiretaps were installed without the hotel's knowledge or consent. The FBI had simply acted, They had the authority. They had the technology. They had the justification, at least in their own minds. The irony was profound. King was at the Willard to finish a speech about freedom and justice, about the fundamental rights of citizens in a democracy. Yet as he wrote those words, his own government was violating his privacy, recording his conversations, gathering information to use against him. The speech King delivered on August 28th became famous for the "I have a dream" section. But that passage was not in the written text King brought to the Lincoln Memorial. It emerged spontaneously. Gospel singer Mahalia Jackson, standing behind King during the speech, called out, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." King set aside his prepared remarks. He began to improvise. The words that followed became the most quoted passage in American oratory. Did King rehearse the dream sequence in his Willard suite the night before? The FBI tapes might reveal the answer, but those tapes remain partially classified. Decades after King's death, portions of the surveillance recordings are still withheld from public access. The FBI claims privacy concerns. Critics suspect the tapes contain evidence of surveillance abuses too embarrassing to acknowledge. What is known is that the Willard surveillance continued for years. The FBI monitored King every time he stayed at the hotel. They tracked his visitors. They recorded his phone calls. They built dossiers of information. Hoover shared selected material with friendly journalists. Anonymous letters were sent to King, threatening to expose his private life unless he committed suicide. The campaign of harassment escalated until King's assassination in 1968. The Willard's walls had witnessed this. The hotel's architecture, designed to provide privacy and discretion, had been weaponized. The thick walls that muffled conversation from casual listeners could not stop electronic surveillance. The private rooms that promised security became sites of violation. The Willard, which had always protected the secrets of the powerful, could not protect the secrets of those challenging power. This contradiction defined the hotel's role in the civil rights era. The Willard presented itself as a symbol of integration and progress. It accepted black guests. It hosted civil rights events. But simultaneously, it was used by the FBI as a platform for surveillance. The hotel was both sanctuary and trap, both symbol of advancement and instrument of oppression. The staff who worked at the Willard during this period described an atmosphere of paranoia. Bellhops were approached by FBI agents asking questions. Maids were questioned about what they saw in rooms. Desk clerks were pressured to report on guests' activities. Some cooperated, others refused. The hotel became a contested space, a battlefield in a larger war about who America would become. Was the hotel a place of power or a site of oppression? The answer was both. The Willard contained multitudes. It was the location where Lincoln wrote words of unity and where King's privacy was violated, where treaties were negotiated and where surveillance tapes rolled. The hotel's history could not be simplified into good or bad. It was complex, contradictory, a mirror reflecting America's highest aspirations and darkest impulses. By the late 1960s, the Willard's reputation was changing. The hotel that had symbolized prestige now carried associations with government overreach. The civil rights movement had exposed the gap between America's professed values and its actual practices. The Willard existed in that gap. A beautiful building where ugly things happened, an elegant facade covering institutional violence. The surveillance of King was eventually acknowledged. Congressional investigations in the 1970s revealed the extent of FBI abuses. The COINTELPRO program, the illegal wiretaps, the harassment campaigns. The Willards' role in this history became part of the public record, but by then, the damage was done. The hotel's image was permanently altered. It would never again be simply a symbol of American prestige. It would always carry the shadow of what happened in its rooms. When the walls closed in, as Washington, D.C. changed, the Willard began to lose its grip on the elite. Its once grand rooms became empty and silent. 1968 was the year everything fractured. Martin Luther King was assassinated in April. Robert Kennedy in June. Riots burned through American cities. The Democratic National Convention descended into violence. Vietnam protests filled the streets. The nation's consensus collapsed. The Willard stood amid this chaos. But the chaos was changing what the hotel represented. Washington was no longer the genteel city of backroom deals and discreet influence. It had become polarized, angry, public. The old ways of doing business no longer worked. Lobbyists still operated, but they faced new scrutiny. Media coverage intensified. Advocacy groups demanded transparency. The Federal Regulation of Lobbying Act required disclosure of expenditures. The informal system that had flourished at the Willard for a century faced legal constraints. The long dinners, the private meetings, the unrecorded conversations. All of it was becoming harder to justify, harder to hide. The hotel's guest registry reflected the change. Business travelers replaced political figures. Tourists filled rooms that senators once occupied year-round. The permanent residents who had lived at the Willard for decades began moving out. They bought homes in Georgetown and Bethesda. They no longer needed to live at the center of power. Power itself was dispersing. By 1970, the Willard was losing money. Operating costs had increased dramatically. Labor unions negotiated higher wages for hotel workers. Energy costs spiked during the oil crisis, but room rates could not rise fast enough to compensate. The economics that had sustained the hotel for over a century stopped working. The building itself was aging badly. The grand renovation of 1868 was over a century old. Systems were failing. Plumbing leaked. Electrical wiring was inadequate for modern demands. The elevators broke down constantly. Air conditioning was ineffective. Paint peeled from ceilings. Carpets wore thin. The Willard was becoming shabby. Management tried to adapt. They renovated some floors, added modern amenities, installed televisions and improved bathrooms. But the fundamental structure resisted change. The hotel had been designed for a different era, for guests who expected service more than convenience, for long stays rather than brief visits, for a style of politics that was disappearing. The financial losses mounted. In 1968, the Willard lost $80,000. In 1969, the loss grew to $120,000. By 1970, the hotel was bleeding money so fast that closure seemed inevitable. The owners considered options: sell to developers who would demolish the building, convert it to office space, abandon it entirely. The irony was bitter. The Willard had survived the Civil War, had thrived during Reconstruction, had adapted to the Gilded Age and the Progressive Era and 2 world wars. But it could not survive the transformation of Washington from a southern city of informal arrangements to a modern metropolis of regulated transparency. The staff felt it first. Positions were eliminated. Bellhops who had worked at the Willard for 40 years were let go. Senior maids, veteran cooks, the institutional knowledge that had made the hotel function evaporated. New hires did not understand the old standards, did not know the history, did not care about maintaining traditions that seemed irrelevant. Guests noticed the decline. Reviews became critical. The once impeccable service degraded. Reservations were mishandled. Rooms were not properly cleaned. The restaurant's quality slipped. The Willard was still trading on its reputation. But the reality no longer matched the legend. Politicians stopped staying. They found newer hotels with better facilities. The Madison, the Hay Adams, the Watergate, which opened in 1965 and immediately became the preferred location for those seeking modern luxury. The Willard's clientele shifted downward. Middle-class tourists, elderly couples on package tours, groups attending conferences who chose the hotel because it was affordable, not because it was prestigious. By 1973, the decision was made. The Willard would close. The announcement came in March. The final guests checked out in July. The doors were locked. The staff was dismissed. The furniture was sold at auction. The Willard, which had operated continuously since 1818, went dark. The building sat empty. Squatters broke in occasionally. Vandals smashed windows. Water damage spread through upper floors. Mold grew in the basement. The elegant facade began to crumble. The Willard was dying. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but through slow neglect, through the accumulation of small failures that eventually become irreversible. Washington politicians occasionally mentioned the Willard. They recalled its history, told stories about Lincoln and Grant, spoke nostalgically about the old days when deals were made over dinner rather than in committee hearings. But nostalgia changed nothing. The building remained empty. The rooms remained silent. The Willard had become a ghost, a memory of a Washington that no longer existed. The question that haunted those empty rooms was simple but profound. What happens when a symbol of power begins to lose relevance? When the institution that once defined a city becomes obsolete? When the walls that witnessed history become just walls? The Willard had no answer. It simply waited in the darkness, wondering if anyone would care enough to bring it back to life. The hotel that couldn't escape its past. In an era of openness, the Willard couldn't shake the ghosts of its secretive past. The empty Willard became a political embarrassment. The building occupied prime real estate. It stood directly between the White House and Capitol, boarded up and decaying. Every day, thousands of people walked past it. Tourists, government workers, foreign visitors. They all saw the same thing: a monument to failure. Proof that even the most prestigious institutions could collapse. Preservation groups mobilized first. The Willard was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1974. This designation prevented demolition, but it did not require restoration. The building remained protected and abandoned. A legal paradox: too important to destroy, too expensive to save. The costs of restoration were staggering. Engineers estimated $20 million minimum. That was for basic structural work: plumbing, electrical, removing asbestos and lead paint. Restoring the building to its former glory would cost much more. Perhaps $50 million, perhaps $70. No private developer wanted that risk. No government agency had that budget. For a decade, the Willard sat. Various proposals emerged: convert it to a museum, make it federal office space, turn it into apartments. Each idea faced obstacles. Preservation rules limited modifications. Financial projections showed losses. Political will was absent. The Willard remained frozen, neither restored nor destroyed. But beneath the surface, Washington was changing again. The Reagan presidency brought new attitudes toward development and historic preservation. Tax incentives encouraged private investment in historic buildings. The economy recovered from the stagflation of the 70s. Money flowed back into urban real estate. In 1986, the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation announced a plan. The Willard would be restored. A private development group would manage the project. They would invest $90 million. They would preserve the historic facade and public spaces. They would modernize the rooms and systems. The Willard would reopen as a luxury hotel. The restoration took 4 years. Workers stripped the building to its skeleton. They reinforced the foundation. They rebuilt floors and walls. They restored the grand lobby. They recreated the crystal chandeliers. They refinished the marble, columns. They worked from photographs and architectural drawings to reproduce details that had been lost. But this was not simple preservation. It was recreation. The new Willard looked like the old Willard, but it was fundamentally different. The rooms were larger, the amenities modern, the systems computerized. The hotel that reopened in 1990 was a simulation of history, a carefully constructed illusion of the past. The marketing emphasized heritage. Advertisements mentioned Lincoln, featured photographs of Grant, described the hotel's role in American history. The Willard presented itself as a living monument, a place where guests could experience history, sleep in rooms where presidents slept, dine where treaties were negotiated. But critics noticed the absences. The marketing materials never mentioned the FBI surveillance, never discussed the corruption, never acknowledged the darker aspects of the hotel's history. The Willard's past was curated, sanitized. The uncomfortable truths were edited out. This selective memory raised questions. Can a place built for secrecy ever fully shed its hidden history? The Willard's restoration suggested the answer was no. The hotel could not escape its past, but it could rewrite it, could choose which memories to preserve and which to forget. The rooms told the story. Room 228, where Lincoln wrote his second inaugural address, was preserved as a shrine. Guests could stay there for a premium rate. The room contained period furniture, replica writing desks, framed copies of Lincoln's drafts. It was a museum exhibit that doubled as a hotel room, but the room where FBI agents monitored King, that room received no marker, no plaque, no mention in the hotel's historical tours. It was just another renovated space, indistinguishable from dozens of others. The surveillance equipment had been removed decades ago. Nothing remained to indicate what had happened there. This asymmetry revealed the hotel's dilemma. It needed history to justify its luxury rates, but it needed selective history, the kind that enhanced prestige rather than raising uncomfortable questions. The Willard wanted to be Lincoln's hotel, not Hoover's, wanted to represent American greatness, not American surveillance. The staff hired after the restoration knew little of the real history. They learned scripts, memorized talking points about famous guests. They could describe Lincoln's stay in detail, but if asked about King, they had no information. The institutional memory had been deliberately erased. Some longtime Washington residents found this offensive. They remembered the protests, the civil rights struggles, the FBI abuses. To them, the new Willard felt fake. A Disneyland version of history. All the glamour with none of the complexity. They stayed away. The hotel's restoration was successful financially, but represented a kind of historical betrayal. Yet business thrived. The restored Willard attracted exactly the clientele IT sought. wealthy tourists, corporate executives, foreign dignitaries, people who wanted luxury with a veneer of significance. They paid $400 per night for rooms that cost $150 at comparable hotels. They paid for the history, even if that history was incomplete. By 2000, the Willard was profitable again. It hosted presidential inaugurations, state dinners, high-profile weddings. It had reclaimed its position as one of Washington's premier hotels. But it was a different kind of prestige. Less about power, more about image. The hotel was no longer where decisions were made. It was where decisions were announced, where politicians posed for photographs, where influence was performed rather than exercised. The ghosts remained. They haunted the renovated hallways. Lincoln's words, King's surveillance, Grant's lobbyists, the accumulation of secrets that no restoration could exercise. The Willard had tried to escape its past through renovation, but the past persisted, not in the physical structure, but in the stories, the knowledge, the uncomfortable awareness that this beautiful building had been complicit in both American democracy's greatest achievements and its worst abuses. Can a place ever truly change, or does it simply change how it presents itself? The Willard offered no clear answer. It remained what it had always been, a place where public and private collided, where history was made and hidden, where the tension between America's ideals and its practices played out in elegantly furnished rooms. The battle for relevance with a new century came new leaders. But could the Willard retain its position as the heart of American power? The 21st century brought new challenges. Washington's power structure had transformed completely. Influence no longer concentrated in hotel lobbies. It dispersed across cable news shows, social media platforms, think tanks, and fundraising networks. The informal system that had sustained the Willard for generations was obsolete. Modern lobbyists worked from office buildings. They filed disclosure forms. They testified before committees. They operated in public view, constrained by ethics rules that would have been unthinkable in Samuel Ward's era. The Willard's dining room still hosted meals, but they were performance, photo opportunities. The real negotiations happened elsewhere. The hotel adapted by chasing different markets. Business conferences, wedding receptions, tourist packages that emphasized presidential history. The Willard became an event space rather than a political hub, a venue rather than an institution. The shift was subtle but profound. Room rates continued climbing. By 2010, the average room cost $600 per night. Presidential suites exceeded $3,000. These prices positioned the Willard as ultra-luxury, but they also limited access. The senators and congressmen who had lived at the Willard year-round in earlier eras could not afford such rates on government salaries. The hotel had priced out the political class it once served. Instead, the Willard attracted corporate executives, lobbyists on expense accounts, foreign delegations with unlimited budgets, wealthy individuals who wanted to stay somewhere significant. The clientele had money, but they lacked the historical connection. They did not understand what the Willard had been. To them, it was just another expensive hotel with nice furniture and convenient location. The management recognized this shift. They invested heavily in amenities, a world-class spa, a renowned restaurant, a bar that served $50 cocktails. These features had nothing to do with history. They were about contemporary luxury, about competing with the Four Seasons and the Ritz-Carlton, about being relevant in a market where history alone did not justify premium pricing. But this created an identity crisis. Was the Willard a historic property, or a luxury hotel, a museum, or a business. The marketing tried to have it both ways. Advertisements mentioned Lincoln and Grant while also highlighting the spa's services and the restaurant's Michelin recommendations. The messaging was confused. Trying to appeal to everyone, it failed to distinctly appeal to anyone. Reviews reflected the confusion. History enthusiasts complained that the hotel felt too modern, too commercialized. The period furniture in public spaces seemed decorative rather than authentic. The historical tours felt perfunctory. Corporate travelers complained about the opposite. They found the historical theming unnecessary. They wanted efficiency and modern amenities, not stories about presidents. The 2008 financial crisis hit hard. Business travel declined. Conference bookings dropped. The Willard's occupancy rate fell to 62%. The hotel responded with discounts and packages, reduced rates for government employees, special offers for weekend tourists. These promotions kept rooms filled, but they undermined the luxury positioning. Once a hotel starts discounting, it signals weakness. Competition intensified. The Trump International Hotel opened in 2016 in the old post office building. It immediately became the preferred location for Republican politicians and foreign delegations seeking to demonstrate loyalty to the president. The Willard's historical significance could not compete with that kind of political signaling. Bookings shifted, revenue declined. The Willard fought back with renovations, $50 million invested in 2017, updated rooms, modernized conference facilities, improved restaurants. The renovation was necessary, but it also diluted the historical character. The new rooms looked like rooms anywhere, clean, contemporary, indistinguishable from any upscale chain hotel. Some of the longtime staff members found this tragic. They remembered when the Willard had a distinctive identity, when guests came specifically for the history, when the hotel represented something unique. The renovations made the Willard more competitive, but they also made it more generic. Another luxury hotel in a city full of them. The pandemic devastated what remained. Travel stopped entirely in 2020. The Willard closed for 4 months. When it reopened, business was minimal. Occupancy rates in the teens. Government employees worked from home. Conferences went virtual. Tourists avoided cities. The hotel burned through reserves, laid off half the staff, suspended amenities. Recovery was slow. By 2022, occupancy had returned to 70%. But the business model had changed. The Willard was now dependent on government contracts, housing federal employees during renovations of government buildings, providing rooms for official delegations. This was stable income, but it was not prestigious. The hotel had become a contractor, a service provider, not a power center. Could the Willard ever regain its status as the center of American power? The question assumed that such a center still existed. But power in modern Washington was too diffuse, too distributed across media platforms and fundraising networks and partisan coalitions. No single location could contain it. The idea of a power center was itself obsolete. The Willard's battle for relevance was ultimately a battle against history, not the past it wanted to preserve, but the past it wanted to escape. The hotel needed to be important enough to justify luxury rates, but not so important that it invited scrutiny. Needed to be historical enough to differentiate itself from competitors, but not so historical that it seemed outdated. This balancing act became increasingly difficult. Every attempt to modernize risked alienating history enthusiasts. Every emphasis on heritage risked seeming irrelevant to contemporary travelers. The Willard was trapped, unable to fully Embrace either identity, stuck between a past it could not recover and a present that did not need it. The hotel soldiered on. It remained profitable, though barely. It maintained its position through institutional inertia and prime location. But the sense of inevitability had vanished. The Willards' future was uncertain in ways it never had been before. Not because of any single crisis, but because the world had changed. And the Willard, for all its adaptations and renovations, could not change what it fundamentally was: a relic of a vanished era, a monument to a style of power that no longer existed, a place forgotten by time. Once the centerpiece of political power, the Willard shadow now stretches across a city that has moved on without it. The Willard today exists in a strange twilight, not quite relevant, not quite forgotten, a place that tourists visit and residents ignore. The building stands magnificent. The facade gleams. The lobby impresses. But something essential is missing: the vitality, the sense that important things happen here. Walk through the lobby on a weekday afternoon. Business travelers check in. Tourists photograph the chandeliers. Conference attendees gather near the elevators. Everyone is polite, efficient, transactional. They move through the space without inhabiting it. The lobby is a place to pass through, not to linger. This is the opposite of what the Willard was designed for. The lobby was meant to be the center, the place where people gathered, where conversations started, where connections formed. But modern travelers do not congregate in hotel lobbies. They have phones. They have scheduled meetings. They have no need for the spontaneous encounters that once made the Willard powerful. The hotel tries to recreate that atmosphere. The bar stays open late. The restaurant encourages lingering, but it feels forced, artificial, like a theme park version of the past. People drink expensive cocktails and leave. They do not build relationships, do not exchange confidences, do not plot the nation's future over cigars and brandy. The staff knows this. The veteran employees who remember the pre-renovation era sometimes talk about the difference, how the hotel used to feel alive, how guests knew each other, how there was a community. Now there are just customers, people who stay one night or two and move on. No one lives at the Willard anymore. No one makes it their second home. The financial reality is stable, but uninspiring. The hotel operates at 75% occupancy. Revenue covers costs with modest profit. The ownership group is satisfied. They are running a successful business. But the Willard's success is measured in room rates and conference bookings, not in influence, not in significance. The historical tours continue. Guides lead groups through the lobby. They point out where Lincoln stood, where Grant smoked cigars, where King stayed. The tourists listen politely. They take photographs. They buy souvenirs. Then they leave. The history is consumed as entertainment, not engaged with as something meaningful. Room 228 remains the most requested accommodation. Guests pay $800 per night to sleep where Lincoln wrote. They enjoy the period furniture. They appreciate the framed documents. But they check their phones. They watch television. They treat it like any other hotel room. The historical significance is a novelty, not a transformation. Some guests claim to feel Lincoln's presence. They report strange sensations, cold spots, unexplained sounds. The hotel does not discourage these stories. Ghost tours have become a secondary revenue stream. Groups pay $50 to hear about paranormal activity, about spirits that haunt the hallways, about history that refuses to rest. But these ghost stories reveal more about the living than the dead. They represent a desire for connection to something larger, a wish that history matters, that the past continues to influence the present. The ghosts are not real, but the longing for significance is genuine. Visitors want to believe that staying at the Willard means something more than occupying expensive square footage. The city around the Willard has transformed completely. Pennsylvania Avenue has been pedestrianized. New museums have opened. The neighborhood is safe and sanitized. The rough edges that once characterized Washington have been smoothed away. The Willard fits this new landscape. Clean, professional, unremarkable. Longtime residents notice the absence. The Willard used to anchor the city. Its presence defined the area. Now it is just another building, well-maintained, pleasant, but not essential, not irreplaceable. If it closed tomorrow, the city would continue. Other hotels would absorb the business. The neighborhood would adjust. Nothing fundamental would change. This is perhaps the deepest tragedy, not that the Willard has failed, but that its success is so ordinary. The hotel operates efficiently, provides good service, maintains its property, but it has become generic, interchangeable. The distinctiveness that once made it powerful has evaporated. The question that haunts the empty corridors late at night is simple. What is the Willard now? Not what was it, not what might it become, but what is it in this moment? The answer is uncomfortable. It is a profitable business, a well-run hotel, a competently managed property, but it is not important. It does not matter. It has been forgotten by time, even as it remains physically present. The shadow the Willard casts is long. It stretches across Washington's history, touches moments that shaped the nation. But shadows are not substantial. They are the absence of light, the outline of something that exists elsewhere. The Willard has become its own shadow, an outline of what it once was, a reminder of a vanished importance that can never be reclaimed. The price of secrecy. The rooms at the Willard are silent now, but their legacy is alive, revealing the price paid for power, secrecy, and ambition. Every building keeps secrets. But the Willard secrets changed history. They shaped legislation, influenced elections, determined wars. The cost of keeping those secrets was borne by people whose names never appeared in guest registries. Consider the maids who cleaned room 228 while Lincoln wrote. They saw the crumpled drafts, the crossed-out phrases, the evidence of a president's doubt and revision. But they could not speak about it. Employment at the Willard required silence. These women carried knowledge that historians would treasure, but they took it to their graves, unnamed, unacknowledged, unpaid for the historical service they provided. Or the bellhops who delivered messages for lobbyists in the 1880s. They knew who met with whom. They understood the patterns of influence. They watched fortunes change hands, but they were sworn to discretion. Speaking about what they witnessed meant immediate dismissal. They needed their jobs. They had families. So they stayed silent while the powerful reshaped America in ways that often harmed the very communities these workers came from. The price of secrecy compounds across generations. The FBI surveillance of King was eventually revealed. Congressional investigations exposed the abuse. But the exposure came decades late, too late to prevent the damage, too late to hold perpetrators fully accountable. The Willards' role in that surveillance was known to a few staff members. They saw the agents. They noticed the unusual rooms. But they said nothing. Not because they approved, but because the system demanded silence. What does it mean to be complicit in the making of history that can never be fully revealed? The question haunted the workers who kept the Willard functioning. They enabled the secrecy. They maintained the infrastructure that made private power possible. They were not responsible for the decisions made in those rooms, but they were necessary for those decisions to occur. Some wrestled with this burden. There are scattered accounts. A maid in the 1950s who quit rather than continue cleaning rooms where she knew corruption occurred. A desk clerk in the 60s who leaked information about FBI presence to a journalist. A cook who refused to prepare dinners for lobbyists he believed were destroying his country. These small acts of resistance went unrecorded. The Willards' official history contains no mention of them. The financial price was easier to quantify. The hotel's workers were paid minimally. Maids in 1900 earned $6 per week. Bellhops survived on tips that were generous when guests were satisfied, but non-existent when they were not. Kitchen staff worked 14-hour days. All of them served people who spent more on a single dinner than these workers earned in a month. This inequality was not unique to the Willard. It characterized the entire service industry, but the Willards' unique role amplified the injustice. The wealth that flowed through the hotel, the railroad contracts, the mining concessions, the government appropriations, was extracted partly through the labor of people who received almost none of it. The maids who cleaned the rooms where million-dollar deals were struck went home to tenements. The cooks who prepared feasts for senators could barely feed their own children. The psychological cost was harder to measure, but no less real. Imagine knowing that your labor enables corruption, that the rooms you clean host meetings where your community's land is stolen, that the meals you serve fuel the machinery of your own oppression. Some workers rationalized, told themselves they were just doing a job. Others internalized shame, felt complicit in systems they could not change. The Willards' black staff faced additional burdens. Before integration, they could work at the hotel but not stay as guests. They served food they could not eat in the dining rooms. They cleaned rooms they could never afford to sleep in. The humiliation was constant. The message, clear. Your labor is valuable. You are not. Even after civil rights legislation, inequality persisted. The highest-paying positions remained dominated by white workers, managers, head chefs, senior desk clerks. Black workers disproportionately filled the lowest-paid, least visible roles. Laundry, housekeeping, dishwashing. The Willard integrated its guest list before it equalized its employment practices. Some found ways to resist. Union organizing in the 1970s gave workers more power. They negotiated better wages, improved conditions, created grievance procedures. But the fundamental dynamic remained. The Willard needed secrecy. Secrecy required loyal workers. Loyalty was purchased through wages that, while improved, still left workers vulnerable enough to fear unemployment. The current staff faces different challenges. They are paid better, protected by labor laws, not bound by the same codes of silence, but they still serve the powerful, still facilitate transactions they are not fully privy to, still maintain a building whose history they know only partially. The legacy of this system extends beyond the Willard. Every major hotel in Washington operated similarly. Every exclusive club, every restaurant that catered to the political class. The architecture of American power was built on secrecy, and secrecy was maintained by workers whose silence was bought with wages that kept them dependent. What price did they pay? The question has no single answer. Some workers were proud of their roles. They saw themselves as guardians of important work. Others felt used, exploited, complicit in evil. Most fell somewhere between. They needed jobs. They did their work. They tried not to think too deeply about the implications. But the implications remain. The Willards' rooms are silent now. The powerful have moved on. But the legacy of secrecy endures. It shaped how Washington operates, how power functions, how decisions are made away from public view. And it was made possible by people who had no choice but to enable it. People who cleaned the rooms and served the meals and kept the secrets. People whose names we will never know, whose stories were never recorded, whose price was paid in silence. The Willards' legacy. The Willard Hotel may no longer house the nation's most powerful, but its legacy continues to echo through the corridors of American politics. Stand in the Willards lobby today and look up. The chandeliers still gleam, the marble still shines, the architecture still impresses. But what are you really seeing? A hotel, or a monument to a particular way of organizing power? The Willards' legacy is not about the building. Buildings can be preserved, restored, maintained indefinitely. The legacy is about what the building represented, a system where private interests and public power merged seamlessly, where democracy's messiness was refined into elegant transactions, where the people's business was conducted in rooms the people could never access. This system has not disappeared. It has evolved. Modern Washington still operates through informal networks, still prioritizes access over accountability, still conducts important business away from public view. The locations have changed, the methods have adapted, but the fundamental dynamic persists. Campaign finance has replaced lobby dinners. Super PACs have replaced the literal lobbyists who crowded the Willards halls. Encrypted messaging has replaced whispered conversations in private rooms. The technology changes. The transparency requirements increase. But power still finds ways to operate in shadows. The Willard demonstrated that secrecy and democracy can coexist, that a nation can espouse popular sovereignty while actually being governed by a small elite, that the gap between ideals and practice can be sustained indefinitely if the mechanisms of power are sufficiently opaque. This lesson has been learned, applied, refined across generations. Consider what the Willard witnessed. Lincoln writing words of unity while planning a war that would kill 700,000. Grant meeting lobbyists while publicly condemning corruption. The FBI surveilling King while officially protecting civil rights. The pattern repeats. Public rhetoric, private reality. The gap between them sustained through secrecy. The building enabled this gap, provided the physical infrastructure for the separation between public performance and private action. The Willard was not unique in this, but it was exemplary. It perfected the model, created a template that other institutions copied. What does this reveal about power in America? That it has always been more concentrated than democratic theory suggests. That the founding ideals of representation and popular sovereignty coexist with practices that contradict them. That the nation has always been governed by multiple systems simultaneously. The official system described in constitutions and textbooks, and the informal system that operates in hotel rooms and private clubs and undisclosed meetings. The Willards' history forces confrontation with uncomfortable truths. Democracy is not simply about elections and legislation. It is about who has access, who can afford to be where decisions are made, who knows the right people, who can navigate informal networks. In this sense, American democracy has always been partial, available fully to some, partially to others, not at all to most. But the Willard also witnessed moments of genuine significance. Lincoln's words mattered. they shaped how Americans understood their nation. King's presence at the Willard, despite the surveillance, represented progress. The fact that a black civil rights leader could stay at a hotel that had once been segregated was meaningful. History is not simple. Places can be simultaneously sites of oppression and progress. This complexity is the Willard's truest legacy. It resists simplification, cannot be categorized as simply good or bad, was never entirely one thing. The building that housed Lincoln also housed lobbyists. The hotel that symbolized integration also facilitated surveillance. The same walls that protected important work also concealed corruption. What does this mean for how we understand American history? That we must hold contradictions, must recognize that the nation's greatest achievements and worst failures often occurred in the same spaces. That the people we celebrate were also complicit in systems we condemn. That buildings like the Willard embody the tension at the heart of American democracy. The Willard itself has no position on these questions. It is just a building, stone and marble, wood and glass, maintained by workers, inhabited by guests, operating according to market logic. The meaning we assign to it says more about us than about the structure. But certain questions persist. Why do we preserve historic buildings? What are we trying to save? If we restore only the elegant surfaces while erasing the uncomfortable truths, are we preserving history or falsifying it? The Willard's restoration chose beauty over honesty, chose marketable heritage over complex reality. This choice reflects broader patterns in how America engages with its past. The hotel will continue operating. Guests will continue staying. Tours will continue emphasizing Lincoln and Grant while minimizing surveillance and corruption. The Willard will remain a successful business, but its deeper significance will continue fading. The building will persist while the meaning evaporates. Perhaps this is inevitable. Perhaps all historical sites eventually become sanitized attractions. Perhaps the distance between past and present grows too great to bridge authentically. Perhaps we can only engage with history as performance, as curated experience, as something safely contained and controlled. Or perhaps the Willard's legacy is precisely this lesson: that secrecy always extracts a price, that power always operates partly in darkness, that the gap between public ideals and private practices is not an aberration, but a feature, that American democracy has always contained this tension, and that buildings like the Willard make that tension visible for those willing to see. The rooms are silent now. The lobbyists have moved to office buildings. The presidents stay elsewhere. The FBI no longer hides microphones in the walls, but the Willard shadow stretches across American politics, a reminder of how power actually works, how decisions are actually made, how the machinery of governance actually operates. This is the Willard's gift, not the preserved furniture or restored chandeliers, but the uncomfortable awareness that democracy and secrecy have always coexisted, that the nation was shaped as much in private rooms as in public debates, that the beautiful buildings we preserve often hide complicated truths, and that understanding American power requires acknowledging what happens behind locked doors in places like the Willard Hotel. The question the Willard leaves us with is not about the past. It is about the present. We know the Willard story now. We understand how it operated. We recognize the gap between its elegant facade and its hidden functions. But do we recognize the same patterns in our own moment? Do we see the contemporary equivalents? Do we ask where power operates now? What spaces facilitate it? What mechanisms obscure it? The Willard's walls witnessed history, But history continues. Power continues seeking privacy. Democracy continues negotiating the tension between public accountability and elite decision-making. The Willard is no longer the location where this plays out, but the dynamics it perfected endure. The legacy echoes. The questions remain. What really happens behind closed doors? Who truly shapes our fate, and at what price?